This is my drum mix for the definition of I. Starting with the kick drum, I've got two kick drums here. The kick drum mic, the AKG D1112, and then the kick sub as well. On the kick drum mic, I've got an EQ compressor and a noise gate. The noise gate just on all the tracks is just there to kind of clean up, kind of just to clean up the track and remove all the low the low frequencies, the um the the quiet unwanted sort of dirt on the tracks and things. That's sort of what the noise gets there, just generally on all the tracks. But with the kick, I've got an EQ, which is just sort of set to a rock kick drum, just sort of removing the mids, boosting the bass, just to have so you've got a solid bass kick, but then also in, um, increasing the highs slightly more, just to get more of a punch out of the kick. And I got a compressor here, just sort of a fair amount of compression, just sort of tighten up the track and sort of raise the levels a bit. And it's the same on the kick sub, although the EQ is slightly different. It's the same, sort of increasing the bass and removing some of the mids. But I've rolled off the the really low ends and the high ends. The really low ends, because below sort of this frequency range, it's just sort of unnecessary kind of low frequencies that you're not actually going to hear anyway. So I've just sort of rolled those off anyway, and I've rolled off the high ends just because the kick drum's fairly low down in the frequency, and I don't need the kick drum really taking up any of the really high end frequencies. So I've just removed just uh, rolled off the high ends as well. And then I've also got a compressor on there, which is the same. And then after that, noise gate, of course, like I've said before, and then we've got an adaptive limiter, just to it's just there to sort of boost the kick and sort of not allow it to kind of peak and go over and things, and it just adds some adds a bit of kind of a bit of a boost and just a bit of fatness to the kick, I think anyway. And then I've got an envelope as well, just to add some punch, add more attack to the kick. So it's a bit punchier. And there's a bit more of a snapback to it. And then there's a match FX, not a match FX, sorry, a fat FX, which is just sort of boosting up the bass and just uh, increasing sort of the low levels of the kick to really get a thud, a low end kind of thud from the kick. And then a match EQ, which just sort of kind of shapes um, the overall sort of tone and sound of the kick, which I think actually works really well and actually makes the kick sound better. And I've also got a bus with two sub basses on it. The first being a kick warmer, and the second being a bass booster. The kick warmer just sort of warms up the kick, gives it some a bit of character and a bit of just some low end, and widens it out. And then the bass booster just sort of increasing that bass and giving the kick a bit of power behind it. And then I've got the kick sub also, with the same bus. I've also got a fat FX on the sub as well, just on booster, just sort of boosting the bass as well to give the sub a low end punch as well. And the EQ is just sort of doing the same kind of idea, just sort of shaping the sound and the tone qualities of the drum. But that's basically it for the kick. And then I got two top snares and then one bottom snare mic. On the top, it is pretty much the same. So the EQ just on a sort of refresh snare, reducing the super highs just because they're not really needed, and sort of giving the snare just a bit of a low end boost, and then a slight boost up here. I might just do that ever so slightly more, just to get some attack in there, and sort of just a bit of reduce in the mids. What it does is it sort of combines the bass and the higher frequencies to sort of come together to create that sort of middle snare sound, which I think it works quite well. And the EQ is the same on all three actually, although the bottom snare is just ever so slightly edited, just with a little bit less. If you notice, just a little bit less of a boost in the low end and a little bit less of a reduction in the high end, but still pretty much the same. And then I've also on the 55 got a compressor and a noise gate. Compressor just sort of light compression, not too much, or like a mid-range amount, I would say. I think it just gives the snare a slight boost in levels. It's the same for the 57 as well. And then I've got an adaptive limiter on both, which is just sort of giving the snare a bit more body and a bit more kind of power behind the snare. But on the 57, I added I've got an envelope on both, with adding a bit more attack to the snare, and this one, the 57's got a bit more punch to it. So I've got one with adding the attack, and then the other just adding more of the punch. So they sort of combine together to sort of create both effects. I've also added an expander on the 57 for even more punch, just to get more fatness and more body to the snare. Now I've also got a Fat FX on both. This snare just sort of with a bit of a booster, so enhancing the bass a little bit. I might just turn that down somewhat so it's not too bassy, but still giving the snare a bit of a boost. And then with this 57, I've got some fat compression on. I was just sort of messing about, and then I sort of came across this on the snare, and when I added it, it sounded really nice. It gave the snare some fatness, some depth to the snare, and just gave the snare a bit more body and character, which I think actually worked really well. And then on the bottom mic, I've got the same things, just sort of set to similar. And then I've got an enhancer on the fatness here, just sort of to enhance the bottom snare and just give it a bit more of a lift. But with all these three mics combined together, with the addition of sort of the room mics and the overheads also picking up snare, overall the snare has a really nice kind of crack and clap to it, and I think the snare overall sounds really good. I also have an under hi-hat mic, with an EQ just sort of reducing the low ends, but then just giving the high sort of where the hi-hats would sit just a bit of a boost. And I've got a compressor as well, just sort of tightening up the track. It's on snare bottom because it's sort of, because it's an under snare and it's fairly close to the bottom of the snare and sort of positioning wise. I actually thought that having a snare bottom actually gave the under hi-hats a nice kind of a nice tone to them, and I thought that actually this sounded quite good, so I stuck with it. And then we got the noise gate, and then we got an envelope, a de-esser, and an expander. the envelope is just sort of it's on Room Killer, just to sort of remove some of the rest of the room and just sort of focus on the hi hats. To remove a bit of the bass and the snare and things on the toms, and just to focus a bit more on the hi hat. That's sort of why that's there. The de-esser is just there to round out the hi hat, just like I said, just sort of smooth it over to give it a more kind of natural sound. And the expander is just sort of crisping up the hi hat, giving it a bit of a higher end boost, and really getting that attack of the hi hat, which I think sounds really nice. And the toms here have all been sort of the tom one, sort of the high tom, have been EQ'd, just sort of a little boost in the mid to low range, and then a little reduction at the very high end. It's just sort of giving the tom a bit of a lift. And then got a compressor here, just sort of like sort of fair compression, but not over the top, not overkill compression, but it just gives the toms a bit of a level advancement, which I think is good. I've also got a Fat FX and a expander. The Fat FX just sort of giving the tom just a bit of an enhance, giving the tom just a bit more body to the drum, which I think is good. And then the expander just adds a bit more punch, and adds a bit more character to the drum, which when this is all combined, I think the tom sounds pretty good. Then tom 2 and 3 I have processed in the same way, but with an EQ, just sort of medium EQ, not too harsh, just sort of a low end peak, and then sort of reduction in the mid range, then just a slight high end peak to have sort of just a few higher frequencies sort of bleed into the lower frequencies. And tom 3 is just a similar sort of thing, just with a slightly lower boost, but pretty similar. I might actually sort of widen that out just a little bit. That's a bit too much. Just move it down ever so slightly, just so it's slightly lower in as an overall drop. But then we've got compression on both. They're just sort of tightening up the track and giving the track somewhat a lift. It's sort of the same as the tom ones. And then we've got the Fat FX, just enhancing the drum, giving some more body. That's sort of the same here. Just sort of doing the same thing. They're just kind of increasing, giving the drum a bit more body and a bit more character and a bit more oomph and power. And then I got an expander on both, just adding some punch to the drum to get a bit more attack in there, and sort of fatten up the drum a little bit. And then moving on to the overheads, I've left them completely natural, just sort of EQing them a little bit, just to lift the higher frequencies. And then I've also just compressed them just to give them a slight boost, and tighten the recording up a little bit. But overall, I've left them fairly natural because I don't really want to mess with the sound and the tone of the whole of all the drums with the overheads. So I like leaving them fairly natural. And I've done the same with the room mics as well, just so I don't really change sort of the tones and the characters of the drums. I can do that more with the individual drums. I like leaving the overheads and the rooms fairly natural. And then I've got a cupboard mic at the bottom, which is just sort of a low end, sort of a quieter mic, just sort of in there just to add some character to the drums. But I've left that natural, just with sort of hi-fi drums, sort of getting a bit of a bass lift, and then a few bits of higher end here, and then sort of reducing the mids. But I think for this drum, because the song, it's very kind of sort of vocal focused, and the drums sort of there just laying down the groundwork and stuff, playing sort of a simple beat through the verses. I want to keep I want to keep the drums sounding fairly simple and fairly sort of realistic. So I like having the drums being fairly natural, which is sort of why I've decided to kind of leave the overheads and rooms as they are, to keep that kind of natural sound. And yeah, that's what I've done with the drums.